After Pandemic Chronicles. Chapter 1, The Request. On Tuesday the 7th of June, 42 AP, after pandemic, citizen 38,643 decided to request a short walk out of his permanent isolation cell. After all, it was his birthday and the Global Health Minister would magnanimously grant this once-in-a-lifetime special permission. He had never been outside since he left the maternity hall and was taken to his mother's cell, 2 years after the big pandemic that changed the world forever. The global health laws allowed a newborn baby to spend the first 3 years of life with its mother and her dangerous germs. After that, every child was taken to an aseptic education institution. Every single child had to start life in isolation. A small cell of 6 squared meters would be the only horizon available to every citizen. Names had been abolished shortly after the Big P, since scientists discovered how dangerous they were. It was proven that simple names such as John, Paula, or Luke were in fact to be banned and replaced by random numbers. Numbers don't tend to socialize like people used to do in the old world. Children had to learn 3 basic rules that would accompany their lives forever. Every cell was furnished with large screens that kept repeating the basic rules. 1. The virus is still out there. 2. Human contact is dangerous. 3. The global authority is looking after you. Citizen 3864 filed his request and hoped for the best. An answer would be provided by the authorities within 24 hours. Chapter 2, The Wait. Citizen 3864 had lived his entire existence in absolute and unconditional respect of the 3 basic rules. He had never questioned them, and his days were repeated undaunted and monotonous in the safety of his isolation. That morning he opened his eyes a few minutes before the usual announcement of the Global Health Authority. Good morning, citizen. It's 6:30 GHT, Global Health Time. Let's begin the Healthy Awakening program with a message from our beloved planetary president, Dr. Citizen 1. Dear citizen, mankind requires your complete cooperation. Despite our efforts to protect your health and that of all our beloved children, the danger is still out there. The terrible virus has not yet been eradicated, but fear not. We shall continue to work on the search for the vaccine. Our scientists have declared that a cure should be ready before the end of the year 43 AP. The announcement was followed by 5 minutes of gruesome images detailing the terrible effects of the global and invisible enemy. To conclude, all citizens were reminded that their good behavior would soon be rewarded with a special journey organized by the authorities for the most deserving. No one was allowed to know the destination. The only certainty was that the fortunate chosen ones would be able to leave their aseptic cell for 24 hours. Citizen 3864 had filed the request 15 times in the last 20 years. Unfortunately, it had always been denied, and he understood the reasons for it. In the year 35 AP, for example, he failed to get up from his aseptic bed within the 30 seconds required by the global law after the start of the morning announcement, 3 times. He was very ashamed of his serious fault and promised himself to become an outstanding citizen. Citizen 1 was aware of everything and would certainly reward him this time. At 7:30 GHT, the screen ordered him to start working for the benefit of society. On that day, he was given a very important assignment for planetary health, to deliver at least 10 sentences that properly described the dangers from which isolation protected the world. He decided to do his best and try to deliver at least 20 sentences. This time he was certain. He would soon get out of his cell. Chapter 3, The Message. Citizen 3864 was anxious. The decision of the Global Health Authority was taking longer than it should. He was almost certain that this time he would be chosen, but he could not stop thinking that perhaps his efforts to become a model citizen would not be enough to deserve the prize. He tried to focus on his work. He had to write at least 10 sentences of praise on Citizen 1. It was a task he had already accomplished thousands of times during his lonely life, and yet, that day, he could not fulfill his patriotic effort. He looked at the screen in his cell and the microphone in which he was supposed to dictate the words. During the years of his education, it had been explained to him that in ancient times people still used their hands to write, but that this had been forbidden to protect public health. A good citizen had to avoid touching any object. The 3 basic rules appeared every 15 minutes, read by a dominant voice and followed by images of the cruel invisible enemy. He had never seen anything else on that screen other than the daily task instructions and announcements on the annual special prize. Suddenly, completely unexpected images appeared and he heard an unknown voice, speaking in a peculiar way. A man was wearing a mask that covered his face and said, "They told us that our freedom had to be taken away to protect public health and prevent the spread of the virus. They told us it would only last a couple of weeks. They told us many scary things and we applauded them. Over time, we realized that a life in permanent isolation was not worth living and that, perhaps, the cure was worse than the disease. After 7 months, we tried to get out and protest, but it was too late. The army attacked us with violence. Most of us were arrested and taken in a parade through the deserted streets of the city, bound and blindfolded, to make an example of us. People in isolation looked out of the windows of their homes and began to insult us and demand an exemplary punishment. All civil rights had disappeared, trampled underfoot by the national emergency decrees. I managed to escape and I am in a safe place, hidden and hunted by the police. I don't know how long I'll be able to hold out without food or a place to find more. I have a message for everyone. They're lying." The video stopped and disappeared from the screen, as if it never existed. Citizen 3863 was very upset by what he had just seen. He didn't know what to do. No one had ever prepared him for such an experience and he had no instructions about it. Meanwhile, the time had come for the noon alimentary vaccine. A hyperprotein tablet fell from a pipe in his cell ceiling. He ingested it as he had been taught and continued with his patriotic work. Chapter 4: The Mutation. Citizen 38,643's anxious waiting was finally put to an end. Immediately after the 3 basic rules, his screen showed him an unusual announcement: "Dear citizens, scientists at the Global Health Authority have discovered that the invisible enemy has managed to mutate and become even more pathogenic. The chances of survival are close to 0 for anyone leaving the safety of the holy and righteous isolation. From today, and until the discovering of a new vaccine, the annual prize is cancelled in order to protect public health. Citizen 1 loves and protects you." The sad announcement was followed by horrible images of the effects of the cruel virus after the mutation. On that day, the authority granted each citizen a double ration for the feeding vaccine. The prize menu included, in addition to the usual hyperprotein tablet, a strong sedative. The citizen ingested both, unaware of their contents, and fell profoundly asleep a few minutes later. He woke up sweating in the middle of the night, long before the mandatory wake-up call. Citizen 3863 hardly ever dreamt. The daily vaccine contained a strong dream inhibitor. Yet, that night, he had been dreaming. He had dreamt he was out of his isolation cell. He had dreamt of discovering what was hidden beyond the few square meters at his disposal. He had no precise images in his mind. On the other hand, he had never been outside and his screen had never shown him the world. He savored his dream again for a few minutes, after which the words of the strange video message he had received a couple of days earlier reappeared in his mind. "Their lie?" He didn't understand the meaning of the sentence. While he was thinking about it, he went back to sleep. Chapter 5: The Health Check. Citizen 3864 was sleeping deeply in his aseptic bed, under the antivirus protective blanket. Suddenly he heard the disruptive sound of a siren that interrupted his rest. Citizen, the invisible enemy is increasingly dangerous. This pestilence must be absolutely controlled to protect the human race from extinction. The Global Health Authority has decreed that everyone must undergo a new mandatory health check. The microchip inside your oral cavity must be replaced with a new one that is more resistant to the terrible mutation. The new chip will allow us to better control your resistance to the new danger and provide you with the necessary treatment. It will be a painless operation. Stay in your bed and open your mouth. At the end of the procedure, you will be sedated and will remember nothing. Citizen 1 loves and protects you. He obeyed as he had been taught, fearlessly and completely confident. The authority only wanted everybody's best. He opened his mouth and waited motionlessly. A micro-medical drone entered his cell through a gap in the ventilation system and completed the operation within minutes. As promised, he fell asleep deeply at the end of the procedure. He awoke after 36 hours. The mandatory alarm had been reprogrammed to allow his body to assimilate the operation and the chip to transmit all the gathered information to the authorities. As the unaware patient opened his eyes, a flashing alarm light lit on the screen of Health Controller 97436, who was performing his patriotic work in his cell thousands of miles away. The light signaled a very serious infraction. Alarm: Citizen 38643 has been dreaming. Correct medication immediately. Chapter 6: Back to the Past. It was the year 2030 and the numerous pandemics of the last decade had significantly changed society and the way people behaved. It had all started 10 years earlier, with the first world televised pandemic and government's responses to the serious crisis. What had begun with temporary restrictive measures to protect public health and prevent the spread of diseases had soon turned into the new normal. When the first freedoms were abolished, populations, terrified of the cruel invisible enemy, applauded in droves. Getting out of their homes was truly dangerous and the authorities were doing their best to protect the most vulnerable. Schools, closed at the beginning of the crisis, were never reopened. Government soon realized that all public resources allocated to classrooms could be used for other purposes. Children continued to receive their education and to interact with teachers in complete safety, at home and thanks to a computer. The same was true for many professions. Any work that did not require going out continued to be done from home, in a smart way. With the expansion of a superfast computer network and increasingly sophisticated technologies, offices soon became a distant memory. Those who performed functions that were deemed essential and could not be performed in front of a screen continued to risk their lives and went out for the first few years, but were soon replaced by machines. In 2028, after the fourth pandemic of the decade, all outdoor activities and human contacts outside of the immediate family were prohibited by law by all governments. The United Nations and the World Health Organization applauded this courageous choice. Nations, weakened by years of economic and social crisis, decided to unite in large continental blocs and abolish national constitutions. Their sovereignty was transferred to the health authorities, supported and advised by the new Global Health Organization. In 2029, the first World Health Constitution was passed, which declared that health was the only right and duty of every citizen. There were numerous protests in some parts of the planet, but the health authorities and the new global police were able to crush them from the start and punish the rebels accordingly. The new world was about to be born and no heretic could oppose it and endanger the holy public health. Written by Counterpropaganda in March 2020.